At the peak of his career, Christopher Cross seemed to have mastered every aspect of his life and profession. During a single award ceremony, he cemented his legacy in Grammy history, becoming one of the most honored artists the music world had ever witnessed. Yet just as rapidly as his rise occurred, everything began to slip away. The man who once embodied the musical voice of a generation was quietly relegated to the margins, his presence fading from the spotlight. However, that chapter was not the most devastating part of his story. Years afterward, he encountered a severe health emergency so extreme that it nearly robbed him of his singing ability, the use of his hands, and the existence he had struggled to reconstruct from scratch. Presently, the manner in which Christopher Cross lives is deeply sorrowful. Christopher Cross's rise commenced in 1981, when a gentle-voiced former drummer from San Antonio walked onto the Grammy stage on 4 separate occasions in one night, claiming every major accolade the music industry could offer. No performer had ever accomplished that before, and none has repeated the feat since. The individual clutching those trophies was Christopher Cross, and at that instant, he seemed fated to control popular music for an entire generation. But almost immediately after the recognition arrived, it disappeared. Today, a recent medical crisis has reshaped his existence in ways that no number of awards could have equipped him to handle. The future Christopher Cross was born Christopher Charles Geppert on May 3, 1951, in San Antonio, Texas. His father served as a pediatrician in the United States Army, stationed at Walter Reed Army Hospital, a role that brought the family into proximity with America's most powerful figures. On one occasion, the elder Geppert treated President Eisenhower's grandchildren. That closeness to prestige did not provide stability for young Chris, because military families relocate often, and the Geppert household moved just as frequently as any other. Their home changed every few years. Friendships formed and then dissolved. The sole constant was the unpredictability of their next destination. Christopher was raised Catholic, and the framework of that religion gave him something to hold onto during the moves. But what truly anchored him was music. He loved Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens, rock and roll pioneers who died young and left behind small but perfect collections of work. He also admired jazz pianist Dave Brubeck, whose complex rhythms and unusual time signatures implanted something in Cross's musical consciousness that would not fully develop until he started creating his own recordings. In the 7th grade, he received a drum set and played it energetically in a group called the Psychos. The drums provided him with a function, a sense of purpose, and a means of being valuable to a collective. That feeling of being essential, of adding to something bigger than himself, would eventually propel him for decades. Unexpectedly, upon reaching high school, Christopher moved his attention to the guitar after realizing that the instrument was more appropriate for writing songs. The drums let him maintain rhythm, but the guitar permitted him to form melodies, express internal feelings, and evolve into a creator rather than just a participant. He also cultivated an appreciation for Frank Zappa, especially Zappa's instrumental technique and rhythmic creativity. Cross aspired to produce music that was refined without being distant, and accessible without being simple. That is a tough equilibrium that most artists never achieve, yet Cross achieved it. During his teenage years in San Antonio, he encountered 2 musicians who would later become lifelong partners: bassist Andy Salmon and keyboardist Rob Muir. The 3 performed together in various arrangements, learning each other's instincts and developing the kind of connection that only years of playing together can generate. In 1971, Cross joined a hard rock band named Flash, a group that opened for Led Zeppelin, Jefferson Airplane, and Deep Purple. These were significant stages for a young musician, and the experience taught him how to maintain an audience's attention when he was not the main act. He subsequently moved to Austin with his bandmates and brought in a drummer named Tommy Taylor. Together, they played cover songs for money while recording demos at Odyssey Sound, a facility later renamed Pedernales Studio. Austin in the 1970s was growing into a music hub, but it had not yet become the polished festival destination it would later be. It remained rough around the edges. Cross and his band were part of that roughness, playing long nights for small crowds and hoping that someone from a record label would walk in. Fortunately, someone did. The sad decline of his career followed quickly. Christopher Cross had just earned more Grammys in one night than any artist in history. He had followed that triumph with an Oscar for a song that became an instant classic. He had 2 number-1 singles and a platinum album that would not leave the charts. All signs indicated a long and steady period at the summit of popular music. Nevertheless, that period lasted barely 2 years before the industry transformed around him. The identical voice that had won 5 Grammys suddenly could not receive airplay on the most crucial new medium in music. The year 1981 was meant to be the start of a lengthy and prosperous career for Christopher. Instead, it turned out to be his summit. Everything that came afterward would be judged against a standard that was likely impossible to sustain. Cross released his second album, Another Page, in 1983, featuring singles such as All Right and Think of Laura. The latter track found an unexpected second life when it was played repeatedly on the soap opera General Hospital after a character's death. Millions of viewers who had never purchased a Christopher Cross record suddenly became acquainted with his voice. But familiarity is not equivalent to commercial success. While the album was moderately successful by ordinary standards, it did not equal the impact of his debut. The sales figures were lower, the radio play was lighter, and the momentum that had carried him through 1980 and 1981 had shifted in another direction. The primary reason for that shift had nothing to do with Christopher Cross and everything to do with a cable channel that launched in August 1981. MTV altered the music industry within months of its debut in ways that nobody could have predicted. Before MTV, radio served as the main gateway to popular music, and a song could become a hit based purely on how it sounded through a car speaker or a kitchen radio. After MTV, a song required a video, and an artist needed to look a certain way on camera. The industry stopped questioning whether the music was good and started questioning whether the face fit the frame. Christopher Cross did not fit that frame, and he was aware of it, even if he did not express it publicly at the time. He was not unattractive, and he was certainly not untalented, but he did not resemble the rock stars that MTV was playing heavily during the early 1980s. Music industry insiders described him as lacking the rock star look, a phrase that sounds vague but carried real financial consequences. He was older than the new wave and metal acts that dominated the channel, and his appearance was softer and less dramatic than what the camera seemed to desire. He looked like a thoughtful, somewhat awkward musician from Texas who happened to write beautiful songs, and that was insufficient for a medium that rewarded spectacle over subtlety. He attempted to adjust to the new reality because he had no alternative if he wished to remain visible. He lost weight, removed his facial hair, and tried to present a more polished and camera-friendly version of himself. But the visual culture of that era was not interested in minor adjustments, and his transformation efforts did not succeed. The industry wanted artists who appeared as though they had been born for the screen. Cross looked like he had been born for a recording studio, which was exactly where he belonged. His music, which had been praised for its sophistication and craftsmanship just 2 years earlier, was suddenly eclipsed by performers who flourished in the video age, artists who knew how to move across a stage, how to dress for a close-up, and how to smolder into a lens without seeming self-conscious. What hurt the most was not the loss of money or fame, although both losses were real. What hurt the most was the sense that his talent had been made invisible by forces unrelated to music. He had not stopped writing good songs. He had not lost his voice or forgotten how to arrange a melody. He had simply become unfashionable in an industry that valued fashion above nearly everything else. That realization was difficult for a man who had been told repeatedly that his music was timeless. He described the experience as deeply discouraging, and he observed his career fade while the critical praise remained intact. Fellow musicians still respected what he could do with a guitar or a melody, and the Grammys still hung on his wall. But the machinery of popular culture had moved on and did not look back. Cross kept working through all of it, never ceasing to make music even when the commercial returns shrank with each release. Yet the gap between his artistic output and his commercial fortunes widened every year. The man who had swept the Grammys was now playing smaller venues and selling fewer records. He watched younger artists take the spotlight that had once been his. He did not become bitter, at least not publicly, but he became quieter about his own achievements and more private about his disappointments. Then, just as he was beginning to accept that the best years of his career were probably behind him, his personal life collapsed in a way that made the career decline look like a minor inconvenience. While Christopher Cross watched his career fade through the 1980s, his private life was unraveling in ways the public never saw. The same years that brought him Grammys and an Oscar also brought him a divorce that coincided almost exactly with his professional peak. And the marriage that followed would last nearly 2 decades before ending quietly, leaving him alone to raise 2 children while still carrying the weight of a career that had never regained its momentum. The first marriage began before anyone knew his name. Cross married Roseanne Harrison in 1973, a time when he was still playing cover songs in Austin clubs and recording demos at small studios, hoping that someone from a record label would eventually notice him. She lived a private life, and little public information exists about her career or background. The details of how they met were never documented, and the couple seems to have preferred it that way. The marriage lasted 9 years, a significant stretch by the standards of the music business. But the divorce came in 1982, a moment that could hardly have been more difficult in terms of timing. Cross had swept the Grammys in 1981 and won the Oscar for Arthur's Theme in 1982. He was supposed to be celebrating the highest achievements of his professional life. Instead, he was navigating the end of a marriage, while also trying to manage the sudden pressure of being the most awarded artist of his generation. The emotional strain of the divorce added to the industry pressure he was already feeling, and it left him starting his second act as a solo artist and a single father almost simultaneously. As of 2026, his estimated net worth, according to various websites, sits between $11 and $15 million, a figure that places him slightly below Michael McDonald and Kenny Loggins, but above other peers from his era. His real estate portfolio in Santa Barbara, California, represents his most significant asset. He lives in Santa Barbara now, focused on his family and his ongoing recovery. He performs occasionally, but not at the pace of his earlier career, and he has not officially retired from music, even though health limitations mean he must be selective about when and where he plays. Despite his reduced visibility, Christopher Cross remains a respected figure in the yacht rock canon, and his Grammy and Oscar achievements continue to define his legacy in ways that no health crisis or industry bias can erase. He is a man who survived the brutal machinery of fame, the collapse of his career, the end of 2 marriages, a near-fatal virus, and a rare disorder that stole his ability to live his normal life. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.